Ever since we started grade school, we've all been told that we need a big, strong government to look after us. And that, sure, it may need fixing here and there, but generally today's government size is about right. We disagree. We think that government is a parasite, living off what you and I earn and using our money to do unpleasant things to us. From being a nation of self-reliant go-getters, America is fast becoming a country of government junkies. We think an alternative exists, one that puts you back in charge of your own life and destiny. We call it the freedom alternative.
This is indeed a day that's going to go down in history here in Connecticut, if not in the entire nation, or perhaps even the world. It's October 5th, 1991, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative on location at the Green here in Hartford, Connecticut, where about 65,000 Connecticutians have turned out to repeal the state income tax. I think it's a blessing, and I commend all of them, as does the entire Freedom Alternative effort. With us, we've got Wolf Neumann, a watcher, a viewer weekly of the Freedom Alternative program. Wolf is from
Huntington, Shelton.
Okay, and you watch the program every week?
Every Tuesday, 8 o'clock, faithfully.
What do you think of all this that's happening today, and how do you relate it to what went on in your country? And by the way, what is your country of origin?
The Soviet Union.
That makes it even more interesting.
Well, as I wrote to 18 of Connecticut senators, people in Eastern Europe risk their lives and limbs to get a government that will listen to the will of the people. In this country, at the same time, we prove dictatorship is alive and well. And what I see here today is an illustration, an example of the people taking their countries back, in this case, their state back. This is the beginning, and I hope they win.
Okay, but not in the context, we must make clear, not in the context of collectivist or statist ideals, but in the context, we hope, of individual liberty ideals.
Exactly, and what attracts my wife and me to your program every week is that what you advocate is what the Founding Fathers wanted. And the tragedy in this thing is that people consider you folks left-wingers. That is how far the ideal of freedom has been removed from the American people, and they allowed it to happen.
We are, in fact, not even on the left-wing, right-wing line. We have to explain that to people often.
Because left and right are together. They sit in different wings of the state houses or parliaments.
Then I take it to say, I take it to mean you are saying it is a one-party system, in fact.
Of course. People always ask me, what do you think about America? And I say, different laws, but it's still a dictatorship.
Tell me something. Do you think that most of the people representing their views and feelings here today, do you think that they fully understand that the issue is perhaps not just the state income tax, but all taxes and how they enslave us?
I think so. I think that message is getting through. I see signs here saying no more taxes of any kind. And I think that people have had it. 43, as you point out, 43% of our monies go to taxes. And since I came to this country, I've seen the standard of living fall more and more from year to year. And the people are told they're the freest on earth and proclaim they have the highest standard of living in the world. We don't.
Could it, in fact, do you think, if this is allowed to continue and our legislators are vying for the vote in return for people being able to intervene on their neighbor's life with too much legislation, could it in fact come to the point where we'll be standing in line for a chicken or a bar of soap like you used to in the Soviet Union?
Of course, no question about it. But, Peter, one thing. Mikhail Gorbachev wrote a book in 1983, and in it he said, our system, our Soviet system, must change. It cannot continue as it is. But he said to my friends in the West, I'm warning you, change your system, or you will be at the same point where my country was in 1917.
Good evening. I'm Jim Davies. And Peter, that makes the second Russian in 3 weeks that has appeared on this program. to confirm what we're saying, that the solution here is the same as it is there, to privatize and to do it fast. Only when government functions are handed back to free enterprise are we going to see any serious reduction in taxes. It was a splendid rally and very well attended, as Peter said. I was less impressed by the media coverage. Channel 8 New Haven gave a very fair report, but the clips I saw on CBS and NBC were pathetic. They featured Governor Weicker complaining of being jostled on his way into work. And they seemed to miss the point altogether. And here is what a photographer from Channel 3 Hartford did when Peter invited him to interview us from the Freedom Alternative. No interest, it seems, in anything a little out of the ordinary and predictable.
I quite agree, Jim, but we were both very encouraged by the variety of people that we saw. There were a lot from the middle class and not afraid to admit that this tax would hurt them indeed. But also there were bikers by the hundreds. And here are some of them arriving with a great roar of engines that excited the crowd. And perhaps most pleasing of all, many trade unionists. Here is the Teamster truck. Their members had just gotten their first hit from this income tax in their paychecks.
Right, Peter. Now, this rally took place on the Saturday, and you might think that there was plenty of car park space in the middle of town. These are the big parking garages operated by the state for state employees, plenty of space. Every single one of them was closed. Those attending the rally couldn't use them. Cars even were drawn up across, blocking the entrance. Even the parking spaces in the street right by the Capitol, they were closed to ralliers. Now, there were some terrific banners all over the area. Here's one that compared God to Weicker. God doesn't think he's Weicker. Axe the Tax was a very popular banner. And here's a boy who wants to go to college when he's a bit older, and he can't because the money has been taken away from his parents and given to the tax gatherer. Robin Hood attended the rally. Robin Hood took tax back from the tax gatherers and gave it back to the people who had paid it in the first place. Here's the right solution. And it's the same in Connecticut as it is in Russia. Privatize and cut spending. Here's a gentleman who had a very ungracious way of describing the people inside the building behind him. And this, of course, is the message to remember this in the November elections. Axe the Tax even went right across the sky.
Of all of what's going on, there are legislators who have said, well, what is the answer? Can somebody come up with a viable alternative? Where would you cut?
See, that's hard to say where you would cut, but I think that if we need a certain percentage of an income tax, I say that we cut all the way across the board that percentage. That would seem to make sense to me.
Do it, you would have to cut state spending across the board. I would cut everything except education equally across the board.
How do you feel about the possibility of privatizing education?
I'm very much in favor of private education. I think it would be less inexpensive and we'd get a better quality student.
Thank you. How would you cut spending?
I would start working on some of the welfare items.
What portion or what percentage of the total budget is represented by public education?
I couldn't tell you offhand. I would expect that it would be a very high percentage.
What would you say if I told you it was 25%?
I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised.
What if I told you that it costs each taxpayer in all taxes combined, federal, state, and local, a total of $6,000 to $8,000 per student per year?
I'm aware of that. I'm a little outraged at it also.
Do you think you could do better privately?
They do down south. They do down south.
Do you think they could do it here?
They could do it here also. My daughter goes to a private Catholic school, and we spend $800 a year.
They've got to cut it all. They've got to put cuts everywhere, not just in one spot or another. It all has to be cut. It's ridiculous. I go out of state every single month to buy my groceries. I haven't bought a pair of shoes in this state for a long, long time, and I'm not going to. So I just see that everywhere they can cut, everywhere, every category they have.
Let me ask you this. How do you feel about the possibility of privatizing what has traditionally been provided by the government?
That's the way it should be. Private enterprise should run it.
So you're in favor of user fees and a pay-as-you-go basis?
As you go. They should.
But what about
highways? They should have it all.
But what about the underprivileged?
Okay, the underprivileged, United Way, they're going to get hurt this year tremendously because of this tax business. People will give to these organizations if it's not stolen from them in the meantime.
Thank you very much. Would you cut spending?
Across the board, I believe that government is best which governs least.
Are you in favor of privatization of services that have...
That way you have more competition. Who has the cheapest price for the best service gets the deal.
Well, how do you feel about privatization of government services?
That's usually more efficient and probably a better idea. But I'm not sure we need all the services that the government says we need.
Why do you think the privatization angle is not presented by the media?
That's a good question. I'd have to think about that more.
Okay. How do you feel about the possibility of privatizing what has heretofore been provided by government only?
Many things should be privatized there. At one point, well, for example, even as libraries, there really is no reason anymore for public spending to support libraries. It can be done by private enterprise.
Could it apply to many other government agencies too?
Certainly, and more, and it will bring in efficiency that only private enterprise can give us. It's not always perfect, but it's much better than government.
Thank you very much.
For all intents and purposes, the rally was a great success thanks to you. But I don't want you to forget for 1 minute the Great Wall of Shame, as it is referred to. It was on display at the rally, and it lists the 96 people in the General Assembly in both houses who voted in favor of this scourge of the earth, this state income tax that's going to burden us, that's going to kill the Connecticut economy. Remember those names. If you want a copy of the list of the 96 names so that you can make sure and vote them out of office, refer to this telephone number that you see on your screen right now, or call the contact number 1-257-4844.
In the second part of our show today, we shall welcome as our special guest Dr. Avery Grayson of Southington, who has just become a Connecticut representative of the Fully Informed Jury Association. To set the scene for our discussion, imagine that you have been accused of something by the government. It might be anything from spying for the Iraqis to running a red light. You're summoned to a court that your accuser owns and operates. Your accuser pays all its personnel and many of his witnesses against you, and even employs your judge. And you find you can hire a defense attorney only from a list your accuser has approved. Between you and this massive railroad job stands just one vital institution, a jury. A group of ordinary people not employed or controlled by your accuser, or so you were told in the schools that your accuser operates. Avery, welcome back to our show. Tell us, why is your Fully Informed Jury Association worried that today's jury may not be as impartial as it should be?
Well, thank you for asking that question. The concern is that the juries are not being told of their right to judge the law in addition to the facts of the case. It's incredible that, in effect, there is judicial jury tampering, that the juries are not being selected randomly from the population. They are being elected from the set of electors or voters in the state. So that gives a subset rather than the people as a whole. Regrettably, the jurors are being instructed that by the judges that they're not to judge the law itself, rather they're to judge only the facts of the case. And that is contrary to a legal doctrine of jury nullification. That is, the jurors have to use their own best understanding, judgment, and conscience in deciding all facets of the case to arrive at a just verdict.
Now, let me ask so that our viewers and I understand. What is the difference between judging the law and judging the facts? Can you explain that a bit?
Well, if you give the right to government to instruct the jurors in what the law is and tell the jurors that they have no right to judge the law, then you can impose tyranny and despotism upon the people. For example, you can have a law that it's illegal to drink water, and if you drink water, it's a capital offense. That would be a law, that'd be an intelligible law, but would it be a just law? No. It's an important right and duty and obligation for the jurors to judge the law, whether it applies and whether the law in general is a moral law. So this is a right. This is not something that is an abstract legal doctrine. Since the time of Magna Carta, this has been a legal precept.
Okay.
It was challenged, and I can tell you when it was challenged, in the early 1630s. Most Americans have heard of William Penn. William Penn was arrested in England approximately 1630 for preaching his religion. He had an illegal assembly at the time. He was teaching Quakerism in England when it was illegal to do so. The Church of England was the official religion. He was arraigned, and the jurors, led by the foreman of the jury, Edward Bushell, said, "We're going to quit. This is crazy. It's nothing wrong about peacefully assembling and telling other people about your religion who want to hear it." A very important thing happened at that time. The judge threw the jurors in jail, said that was not an acceptable verdict. They were put in jail. 4 of the jurors stayed in jail for 9 weeks, and there was bread and water, no tobacco, no toilet facilities. Of course, the jurors' families appealed this decision to the Court of English High Pleas, and the Court of English High Pleas released the jurors and said, this is not the sort of society we want to live in. And jurors have to be able to judge not only the facts of the case, but the law itself. And it established at that time the right of assembly, the right of speech, and the right of jurors to come in with whatever verdict they and their moral conscience can live with.
Gotcha. So when you and I and our viewers may watch programs like Matlock or Perry Mason and watch the judge instructing the jury and saying, now, you ought to weigh up all the evidence here, but the law you take from me, this is what we're talking about, right?
That's exactly what we're talking about.
And I've seen that happen in a real court. And the judge lays down the law, literally, I think, and says, well, you ought to take the law from me. And this example was a case where they didn't. They overrode the law.
There's so many cases of jury nullification. And jury nullification is the last mercy buffer between the raw power of the state and the individual, the minorities. An example in this country, there are many examples, was the Fugitive Slave Act. That was an act of 1850, which if a slave left their owner at the time, if somebody harbored that slave and gave assistance to them, that was a criminal act, punishable fine and being put in jail. North of the Mason-Dixon line, though, they couldn't get a conviction on that law because the people realized this is crazy. This is supposed to be a free country. People should be free, and there's nothing morally right about this law that will put people aiding and abetting slaves in jail. So they couldn't get an acquittal. Conviction, excuse me. And so that's an important, more current example of this.
Yes. So that's fascinating. That the jury has frequently in the past overridden the judge's instructions, the law of the land, and they said, well, we're not going to have that.
And it's such an important thing.
At least.
It's such an important thing because the judge has the right of freedom of speech too, and he can give his opinion, he can give his advice to the jurors. But the important point is that the juror's opinion is sovereign. The jurors have the last word. And what makes that so important is that most of the institutions of our government are based upon majority rule. The executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch, all the decisions are made by majority rule. Majorities can be wrong. And the last judicial tribunal is the jury of one's peers. Thomas Jefferson said, "The only anchor yet imagined by man that can hold a government to the principles of its constitution is the jury system." The right of one individual sitting on a jury to say, yes, he may have committed that act, but the law is wrong. This individual needs to be acquitted. And it should be absolutely the right of the individual accused of a crime to say before the jury system, in your heart, do you think I broke a worthy law? Is this law morally just? If you agree with me that this law is wrong, then acquit me. But unfortunately, frequently the accused can't do that, because if the defendant's attorney tries to bring up this issue of jury nullification, the judge can cite that attorney for contempt of court.
Wow.
So that's pretty incredible that we've had an erosion of these freedoms.
That sounds like a piece of wholesale jury tampering by the judge.
Well, it is. There's just no question that's what it is.
Wow.
And so what the fully informed jury amendment is about is to try to legislatively enact a law in which the judge has to tell the jurors of their right to judge not only the facts of the case, but the law itself.
Might stick in their throat.
It probably would be uncomfortable to a lot of judges, but not to all. But this power, it's interesting to note that prior to 1894, all jurors were told of this legal doctrine, their right to judge the law itself. In 1894, though, regrettably, a Supreme Court decision came about that allowed judges not to tell them of this right. And that needs to be corrected. The Fully Informed Jury Association is trying to, whether or not the judge is told to instruct the jurors of this right, to let all Americans know of this important civil right, that if they're in a jury system, in a jury box, their opinion is sovereign. I mean, harken back to the earlier part of this program where the income tax is being debated. The majority of Connecticut citizens disagree with the income tax. They consider it plunder of their resources.
Yeah.
They rallied to try to, at the ballot box, give the message to our legislators that they disagree with this and they'll be voted out of office unless they agree. There is another way. The other way is our freedoms can be protected by the jury box, too. And there, it's the right of a juror to sit upon somebody who is before the people, and let's say he hasn't paid his income tax.
Right, supposing he's refused to do that.
He's refused to pay his income tax, and he tells the jurors, if he's allowed to do so, that I didn't pay this income tax because I think it's immoral, I think it's wrong. If you agree with me, acquit me. And the juror has the absolute right to do that. The judge can give the instruction, this is the law, you must obey it, but the juror has a sovereign right to say no.
Okay, so let me understand. The Fully Informed Jury Association aims here and around the country to cause laws to be written, or is it in fact to amend state constitutions?
No, not. What the Fully Informed Jury Association wishes to do is not to rewrite laws. Our laws are written by the legislators, but what it is to do is to give feedback to the legislator if they have or have passed laws that the people disagree with. And even minorities within the population that disagree with it, it's a way to forcefully nullify these laws that are found so objectionable. Again, it's the one case where the minority is important. We're all minorities. Each and every one of us is a minority of one.
Sure.
And we must not have our freedoms trampled upon by a majoritarian dictatorship. And because majorities can be wrong. I mean, the majority, our country, put the Japanese Americans in concentration camps during World War II. That was unjust. So the majorities can be definitely wrong.
So, so that I have it clear, the Fully Informed Jury Association, FIJA as we call it, what exactly are they proposing to do in Connecticut, for instance?
Well, it's partly educational. I mean, what we're talking about now probably sounds unconventional to most of the people listening, but there are prospective jurors out there that really should know they're sovereign in the courtroom. They have the last word. So it's educational. So part of it is just to educate. The other part of it is to instruct jurors. The last thing the judge says to jurors, yes, you have the right, and this was spelled out by John Jay, you have the right not only to decide the facts of the case, but all other facts of the case, including the morality and the justness of the law itself. John Jay was the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States.
Well, they're not going to do that. Judges are not going to do that unless there's some law enacted that makes them do it.
And that would be through legislative action.
So that's what they're calling for, is that right?
That's one way, and that's this grassroots effort is a nationwide effort, and they're working for this sort of legislative action.
Okay,
yes.
yeah, I understand. Supposing, well, let me ask one other thing. There would be some who would say, if you had juries unpredictably changing the laws they saw fit in a given case, this could lead to chaos. It'd be anarchy in the bad sense. What's your answer to that?
They wouldn't change any laws at all. It would set no precedent. In this particular case, the jury would be saying, this law is misapplied, or this law is wrong. So that individual would either get a mistrial or be acquitted, but it wouldn't change the law itself. However, if time after time after time there was a mistrial or the individual was acquitted, that would send a message to the judicial system and the legislators, and eventually that law would be repealed. The police would start looking the other way, the prosecutors would get tired of losing in the courtroom,
Gotcha.
and eventually there'd be that feedback to legislators, oh, we have a bad law here,
Gotcha.
let's repeal it.
Yeah.
Prohibition came about that way. You know, most of us are taught about prohibition that, well, it was an idea that was tried, it was kind of a bad idea, and eventually it went away. Well, that wasn't really the case.
Didn't just go away.
It didn't just go away.
Yeah.
It just, they couldn't get a conviction in prohibition. Individuals sitting on the jury said, gee, you know, look at what this law is doing. It's creating chaos. It's creating problems where individuals, we have corrupt judges and corrupt legislators. We have problems with alcohol that's been adulterated, and people are hurting by that. And oh, I also like to have a nip now and then.
Yep.
So the juror sitting in the box basically said, no, you may have broken the law, but the law is wrong. And eventually that fed back to legislators, and they repealed the law.
Right.
That's how prohibition came to an end.
Right.
And where most of us are not taught that.
No. So jury nullification is, in fact, what repealed that amendment, that constitutional
That
amendment.
had a great deal to do with it. It wasn't divine intervention that the legislators one day woke up and said, this is a bad law. It was actually that jury power where the people themselves said, this law is wrong.
Fascinating. Supposing our viewers understand this and agree with us and want to do something to help, what would they do to help?
Well, I think learning more about jury nullification would be the place to start. This fully informed jury amendment is stationed in Helmville, Montana, and I'd be happy to give you the address to write for further information.
Okay. Well, folks, if you would like to call that number on the screen, we can put you in touch with Avery, and he will do exactly that. So please call if you'd like to help. Well, Avery, thank you very much for that excellent account of the subject of fully informed juries. And while we're here, you're running for public office, are you not, next month? What is that?
That's right. I'm running for office in Southington. I'd like to be elected to the town council there.
Well, very good luck indeed.
Well, thank you very much.
Well,
I'm hoping to make a good showing, and I'd like to win, like to recruit individuals for the Libertarian Party, and do my best.
Very good. Good luck.
Thank you.
Well, folks, join us next week on The Freedom Alternative, same station, same day of the week, same time, when we shall have another special guest joining us, Lou Klein. He's running a very interesting race indeed for first selectman in the town of Brookfield. Good night.